Hello and welcome to episode 40 of Can We Still Be Friends, a podcast that tests the limits of the friendship between two people who mistake movie taste for personal morality. I'm Nate Goss, here with Ryan Ebling. Nostalgia is a common topic here on Can We Still Be Friends, and Hollywood always likes to look back at bygone eras to make sense of the present day. In this episode, we're looking back at 1997's LA Confidential, a noir-inspired police mystery set in the 1950s. We weren't only interested in seeing it again, though that wasn't a tough sell, but we also wanted to talk about why certain decades seem to pique the interest of filmmakers and filmgoers.
LA Confidential was a commercial and critical success, earning 9 Oscar nominations and 2 wins, one for Kim Basinger as Best Actress, and one for its screenplay adapted from the James Ellroy novel. LA Confidential tapped into the appeal of old Hollywood glamour and film noir, which brought the film a broad audience while appealing to cinephiles as well.
But has its early appeal stood the test of time?
Or is LA Confidential a movie best kept off the record, on the QT, and very hush-hush? Keep listening.
Edmund, you're a political animal. You have the eye for human weakness, but not the stomach.
You're wrong, sir.
Would you be willing to plant corroborative evidence on a suspect you knew to be guilty in order to ensure an indictment?
Dudley, we've been over this.
Yes or no, Edmund?
No.
Would you be willing to beat a confession out of a suspect you knew to be guilty?
No.
Would you be willing to shoot a hardened criminal in the back in order to offset the chance that some lawyer...
No.
Then, for the love of God, don't be a detective. Stick to assignments where you don't have to make those kind of choices.
Dudley, I know you mean well. But I don't need to do it the way you did. Or my father.
At least get rid of the glasses. I can't think of a single man in the Bureau who wears them.
Well, Ryan, I know you would be willing to do most of those things in that clip we just listened to, but the question we're going to does Ed Exley have it in him? That's the question in that scene.
That's the question in that scene. That's a question through most of the movie. Yeah. But like you said, you and me, not a question. We'll do again.
We would both make great detectives,
right?
Because we've got no problem getting our hands dirty in those ways.
Absolutely, so. Yeah. But yeah, that Ed Exley character,
Guy Pearce,
kind of
is who plays that character.
Right? Guy Pearce plays Ed Exley. He's an interesting character. I think this movie's full of interesting, conflicted characters.
Absolutely, complicated.
It's, one of the things that makes LA Confidential a movie that I've enjoyed a lot throughout my life.
Yeah, and actually, it had actually been a while since I've seen the movie, so I was really excited to get back into it, try to watch it again, see how it maybe holds up over the years, because it doesn't seem like it'd be that old of a movie, but it actually kind of is. I mean, 97.
19 years, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. We're coming up on 20 next year, right?
Yeah.
That's how that
so
works.
we're just doing it a little early. The anniversary. But the real reason we were doing this had actually to do with the fact that The Nice Guys came out, right? That's what we talked about in the last episode.
It's a convoluted thing, and I know the Nice Guys is nothing like LA Confidential, really. But what got me thinking is because Russell Crowe and Kim Basinger are both in The Nice Guys and LA Confidential, and I just thought it was interesting for this like crime movie set in the past, starring both of these actors. It just immediately reminded me of LA Confidential.
Right. And then because Nice Guys takes place in the 70s.
Right. Yeah. And I did the math quickly in my head, and then I did it again in a calculator.
And it was more accurate.
Right. To see the time period, the 70s, is 40 years away from us right now. And the 50s were 40 years away from 1997. So it was sort of interesting when I saw the 70s setting. I kind of had this feeling about it, and then I remember that it didn't feel that far away, like all these other things. And then I remember in the 90s, the 50s felt so far away, you know? So that just kind of got me thinking, and I think once I brought it up to you and just told you that, yes, it is interesting, Nate, don't look at me like that, we kind of started thinking about, well, why... What is it about the 50s and the 90s and the 70s today?
Yeah.
Why do people pick any decade ever?
Yeah, there's a lot of different angles you could take this, because as you've done the math, what is it about 40 years maybe? It's an interesting topic, and I think this is a good movie to jump off of that.
Yeah.
So
add to the fact that we really like I think, LA Confidential.
Well, yeah, I mean,
right?
at least that's my memory of it, is really liking it. And so,
Right.
we will do the regular conversation as well about what we think of the movie itself, but sort of through this lens, I think, of looking at time periods and also looking at how historical periods, I think, are portrayed in movies that are done years later,
Yeah.
So, we always like to start our episode by going over the first time we watched the movie and then maybe talking about what we have it rated as in our letterboxd.com account, which we haven't really talked about in a while. If you're looking for a place to maybe keep a little diary of the movies you watched, we do that on a place called Letterboxd, letterboxd.com, and you can follow us and just see what we've been watching. Right. And we always rate basically what the movies that we've seen on there and talk about it. So, do you want to talk about your first time seeing LA Confidential?
I actually have a very vivid memory of the first time I saw LA Confidential.
Really?
Now, maybe strange. I don't know. 1997 was like the first year I really paid attention to movies. I was only 13. But I remember, Titanic came out that year.
Yeah.
And I remember that Oscars like really well.
You're right. I think Titanic made a lot of, like, I'm the same way. Like, that's the year I started paying attention to the Oscars in particular.
The Oscars was huge. Titanic, this huge hit. Is it going to win all the Oscars? Like 14 nominations. It won 11. And LA Confidential was nominated that year. So you
tried to kind of catch up with a lot of the other movies. Yeah.
Yeah. As a 13-year-old, I would watch like the Oscar run-up stuff, like the Good Morning America segments and all that stuff, whatever. And LA Confidential was always listed in there. And it was kind of funny because as much as people were talking about Titanic, I felt like LA Confidential came up quite a bit, and now in my recollection, it's because the critics really liked LA Confidential and would say like, "This is a great movie." If anybody is going to be Titanic,
it's the age-old story of the populist movie versus the critical darling,
right? So I remember just seeing clips about it of LA Confidential a lot. That scene, I think it must have been in the trailer, but I think it was also in a lot of like the clip stuff. That scene where one of the guys in the interrogation says, "I didn't kill nobody."
Yeah.
Like that scene is always stuck in my head.
It is in the trailer, by the way, because I just watched the trailer, and it's one of those old school trailers with the voice. What's the guy's name who did all the trailers?
I honestly don't remember, but I know he's like famous in a lot.
He breaks down in the trailer all the characters. Like
It's one of those.
Yeah, like the guy with integrity, the guy with a complicated sense of justice, and the guy who wanted all the spotlight.
Yeah, I can picture it. I should have looked it up because I was like, I wonder how much of that trailer I would remember. So LA Confidential was always sort of like this movie I was intrigued by. And then I remember specifically when I got it from the video store. We had this great independently owned video store.
You've mentioned it quite a bit actually in the podcast.
And the people who worked there were never hesitant to give you their opinion. But I remember it must have been 2001 because You Can Count on Me was on VHS. So I got You Can Count on Me. I had heard good stuff about it. I was in high school. I would have been 16. So I got You Can Count on Me and LA Confidential.
All right. Those are two
on VHS. Very different movies.
But very, I think we both say very good movies, but not only that, formative movies. Like,
those are two of like the most
for
important
a lot of people,
movies.
I think our age, like the people who were kind of coming of age
first
during
time,
that time.
Mark Ruffalo's first big movie with You Can Count on Me, and then Kevin Spacey was kind of like really big for like 10 years there between like 95 and 2005 were kind of like his heyday. So I had those, and I didn't know about LA Confidential. I got it because like I'd always been intrigued by it. So I go up to the counter, and you never knew with these guys how it was going to be. And the guy holds them both up and looks at me, and I was like, "What?" And he's like, "These are great movies." And I was like,
"You were validated."
Good, yeah. So the day I saw LA Confidential,
you done good, kid.
Yeah. If he,
hey, we're proud of you.
At some point in my life, I bet he was like going out the door and stopped, and then looked back at me and just kind of nodded, and then walked back out the door. So I watched both those movies in the same day, in the same afternoon.
Wow!
I watched You Can Count on Me first, and then I watched LA Confidential, and I loved it. And I remember I like told a friend of mine who was older than me. I was like, "Oh, I just saw LA Confidential." He's like, "That's a great movie." And so like I've always felt good about watching LA Confidential because people that I really respected told me immediately that I was making a good choice.
Yeah.
Everything about it grabbed me. And it's one that I've rewatched over and over. I don't own it though. Of all the movies I own, I don't own that one. I don't know why.
Yeah. So I take it, is this a 5-star on Letterboxd?
It's actually 4.5. I'm surprised to see.
Okay. All right. And this is before the rewatch.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So for me, I didn't see this movie in the theater. I'm a little bit older than you, but not by much. I was 14 when it came out. But this is, I think, one of maybe 3 movies I can say I watched for the first time on Laserdisc.
Whoa. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, this was a Laserdisc viewing for me. You know, and for the listeners who are maybe a little bit younger, this is like a huge ass CD is what it looks like. It was like a record that looked like a CD.
Big as a record, but it looked like a CD on both sides.
Right.
Because it couldn't hold much data for as big as it was.
And it was supposed to be like, this was like what high def was before DVDs.
This was like, wow.
So the reason I saw it on Laserdisc was because it was my senior year of high school where I actually watched this. So it was around 2000. Okay. And senior year was a year, it was the first time in our high school where you could actually, if you didn't want to eat in the cafeteria or in the commons area, you could just kind of leave and do what you wanted to. And I wasn't an unpopular kid, but I was kind of in just like this fringe group, and we hit it off really well with our journalism teacher. And he used to tell us if you wanted to eat in the AV room, you could do that. So we did that, and it was just 4 of us guys during lunch senior year. Every lunch period we would go and we would eat in the AV room, and we would just watch movies while we ate, and they were all on Laserdisc.
The school had LA Confidential on Laserdisc?
And the school, isn't that weird?
That's
like, I
super
didn't
weird.
think about it until now. And maybe it was his personal collection that he just kept in there. I have no clue. But I watched LA Confidential during school hours in high school, along with like Philadelphia. For some reason, he had it was an odd collection of movies.
Odd.
But
any collection of Laserdisc is an odd collection.
But they were mostly movies that all came out in the 90s and were like critically acclaimed, basically. And so I just remember, and we didn't hardly know anything about movies.
Yeah,
what we saw was Kim Basinger on the cover and was like, "This looks
cleavage.
This looks good. Let's watch this one." And it had it just. The whole thing had style to it, you know, and I don't even think we knew it was the 50s we were watching, but we could tell right away, even in high school, this is a very stylized version of the 50s that we're seeing. And I just remember we all kind of enjoyed watching it because it moved at just a really kind of quick pace and kept you interested. But I don't know that we all really understood. We understood the story, but we didn't really understand what the movie was doing as far as genre. No clue. Sure. None of that. It didn't matter. We just enjoyed it.
Twist ending.
Yeah.
And
we just kind of liked it. And then it just kind of stuck with me over the years. And then I just remember 5 or 6 years later just being like, I kind of just want to watch that again, and just picking it up and watching it again. I think I've seen it about 3-4 times. Every time I've always liked it a lot. I don't know that I would always say it was like one of my all-time favorite movies, but it always had kind of a special place in my heart as well.
Yeah. So your Letterboxd rating?
I looked and it was a 4-star for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And did that change on the rewatch?
I think that our approach in this conversation is very interesting because as far as movies, when they're made during their time period, how they portray other time periods, to me, it's still a very good movie, but it felt of its time. It felt like a 90s movie. Yeah. More than I thought it would when I rewatched it.
I'm with you.
And I for certain reasons because of that, and I think it's probably unrealistic expectations on my part. I kind of feel like I'm more at a little 3.5 right now.
Really? It dropped
a little bit.
For
not
me,
a lot.
I think I'm just going to keep it at 4.5. I think with its backstory, I would have expected it to like go back up to 5. But for me, I was surprised. So I think we can get into that a little bit.
Okay.
We'll get back to that idea of things not being what you remember them. But one of the things, if we can get into it, that surprised me, the opening credits, I remember being so full of life. And this time I was like, oh, that's actually pretty conventional.
Come to Los Angeles. The sun shines bright, the beaches are wide and inviting, and the orange grove stretches far as the eye can see. There are jobs aplenty, and land is cheap. Every working man can have his own house, and inside every house, a happy all-American family. You can have all this And who knows? You could even be discovered. Become a movie star, or at least see one.
The voiceover by Danny DeVito, you get the intro to the Hush Hush magazine, all this stuff going on. And I'm like, okay, it does a good job of introducing the movie and the feel of it. But this time around, I felt like it only did that.
Do you think it's because we've seen that, and it seems it's like kind of at a slower pace now because in the time since people have done that thing, but it's been more kind of sped up or at a higher clip. Because I remember, in fact, if I look back on that high school experience of watching it in that AV room, the first thing I remember, really, it was Danny DeVito's voiceover in that beginning. The whole line, on the QT,
off the record on QT, very hush hush. Yep, that's probably like the first thing that kind of strikes you about the movie. Not only is it the first thing in the movie, but it's such a big part of not only driving the plot, but the whole feel of the movie.
It's that pulpy kind of
So I would say probably the first time you watch that movie, that definitely is the part that sticks with you. I feel like every time I've watched it, something else has stuck out to me. I remember the last time I watched it, the shootout at the Victory Motel scene just blew me away. The lighting of it and the
this
way
is near the
very end of the movie. Yeah,
you've gotten the twist by now,
right? I didn't mean like. Plot-wise, it's not super important what happens there just yet in our conversation, but I just remember the way that the bullets would create these shafts of light into the room, and just the very stark lighting, making it so noirish, just really struck me the last time I saw it. This time it was something different. I was struck by how, from the beginning, James Cromwell is such an unsettling character. Partly because he's Farmer Hoggett, partly because James Cromwell has that voice, that face that should be so comforting. Yeah. But you just know it's not.
And you kind of know it's not just because of the setting it's in. Yeah. You're kind of like, this is a weird casting choice.
And then especially after you've seen it, his performance, James Cromwell's performance, really rewards the second and third and 15th viewing. And that's the other one of the things that I think makes this movie really great is its casting. James Cromwell, of course. Kevin Spacey as that like suave.
He's so good in that.
He's amazing.
Yeah.
Russell Crowe does a great job.
That was my first movie that I ever saw of his. I think it is one of his first movies.
So.
But I think it pretty much put him on the map, and rightly so. I mean, it's a perfect character for him to play.
Honestly, I could name everybody because everybody's perfectly cast.
Well, and I think a testament to that is the fact that you could go through that whole cast and it is one of their best performances of their entire career.
Yeah.
You're talking about scenes that really hit you at certain times. This time around, it was the interrogation scene for me.
Oh, yeah.
Like the pacing of that is just, you are on the edge of your seat when you watch that. And it's all acting.
Lewis, who's the girl? What's her name?
Who are you talking about? Was she at the Night Owl? Lewis, listen to me. Was she at the Night Owl?
This newspaper shit ain't shit. Where's the girl Fontaine's talking about? Did you kill her? You wanted Lewis to lose his cherry, but that wasn't enough. So things got out of hand and you made her bleed. She bled on your clothes, so you burned the clothes.
I told you that.
Now listen to me. If that girl is still alive, she's the only chance you've got.
I think she's alive.
You think? Then where is she now? Did you leave her someplace? Just sell her out? Tell me where she is. Move!
You've seen interrogation scenes before, but it usually sticks to three people. Maybe good cop, bad cop, the guy. Maybe there's somebody on the other side of the wall or the glass. Yeah. But this one is so complicated. He's going between three different rooms, talking to different people, throwing the mic on so the other person can hear certain parts. But then you've got the added layer of almost the entire department sitting outside watching this and reacting.
Yeah. On top of all that, you've got Exley who has been vilified by this department. Not only does he need the guys to confess, he needs to be successful so that he isn't completely ostracized from that. So there's all these layers of pressure too. And he's flying without a net because he's asked, do you want me to go in? And he's like, no, I've got all three. Like, I'm going to do this whole thing. So he's good cop and bad cop and like the person watching who would usually kind of give like, he's cracking, you got to do this. Right. Like, he's just completely honest. It's a mesmerizing scene. So that was something that that was the standout for you this time.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's just kind of like, no matter how my opinion of this movie changes over time, I cannot argue with the fact that it's just got these amazing moments that are perfectly executed, and it's just such high quality filmmaking.
And it's a rare movie that rewards every level of viewer.
Yes.
Honestly. If you're there for the sex and the violence and the mystery, you can pretty much get your fix.
Get what you need, yeah.
Without being lost in the complications. Because the movie does an amazing job of leading you through it. Mm-hmm. Even if at the end you couldn't totally connect the dots and you forget about Dick Stensland from the beginning, and the Night Owl murders is just like, you don't even remember where those were.
Right.
Why that happened. You can still hang with the movie and have fun with it and enjoy what's going on and be like, that was like so crazy when he like broke the chair and then he did this. But if you really need a movie that is full of character, it's got that. It's got so many great characters, so many different characters. If you need a movie that's going to like challenge you with its plot, it'll do that too. If you feel like following it very closely, you can still totally be rewarded with like the unfolding of the mystery. Yeah. I feel like a lot of movies can't toe that line between it's really fun and everybody can enjoy it, and it's really complex, and some people will really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Like Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. I don't know if you saw that movie.
It's always been on my I need to see this list, and I just haven't done it.
Now, here's the thing. I love spy movies. You know that.
Yeah.
Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy was so complex that I just was like, okay.
You're almost getting tired.
I did. Yeah. And I stopped following it. I kept watching it, but I stopped following it. And by the end, when like the big reveal happened, I'm like, I don't even remember who that was.
Yeah.
And that's on me. Like I was probably too tired or something. But it's one of those movies that I would say didn't handle it well enough to be like
that popcorn,
clear. Right.
Just
right. Summer, like whatever. And not every movie has to be that, but like
but a spy movie often should be. Right. You know what I mean? Like, right. It should be entertaining if it's a spy movie.
Yeah, you shouldn't need to know like the ins and outs of the British spy system. So I think that's something that this movie does better than almost any other like mystery sort of like intrigue movie. So it's a movie that for me has really done well with repeat viewings, but I kind of wonder if it's hit a point of diminishing returns now.
Well, maybe we should get into that, because that's with kind of my experience. I don't want that to make it sound like I didn't enjoy watching it this time.
Right.
I think maybe just certain things struck me differently, and not necessarily in a totally positive way.
Yeah.
Like all of a sudden just kind of seeing maybe a little weakness here and there. And
weakness? Or just it hasn't aged well?
Well,
or doesn't, like, we've watched it enough.
Well, it's crazy that the amount of times I've watched it and how I still have to feel like I'm kind of still trying to piece really everything together. This comes from the book, from what I understand. Although I didn't read the book, but it is a very dense, complicated plot.
James Ellroy always writes very thick novels.
Right. So I commend the movie for even being able to pull it off, and that you actually can follow it if you pay attention. And it does, well. And it knows where to hold back. It knows where to really reveal But yeah, I mean, I guess we can maybe get into some of the more things that struck me as, I guess the best word I'd have for it is just kind of odd now.
Okay.
Let me get into one of the things that I think it sort of dates the movie, but it's not the movie's fault. And that is, this is a movie about cops and the way cops work and the way cops make decisions and the tough positions they might be in. And the character study there is amazing. And you've got everyone kind of represented. You've got the one who wants to live by the rule of the law, and you got the other one who just has that sort of fire in him that he's going to make that decision that needs to be made, even if it's hard. We know this. Yeah. So I think the movie could have never predicted the firestorm we now have with how cops are viewed, and how race plays into that. Specifically in the beginning of the movie, and perhaps this is all intentional and it's brilliant because of this, but I feel like the movie is trying to get the audience to sympathize a little bit more with Bud White and think Ed Exley is just an absolute weenie who needs to get his ass kicked, because he doesn't understand real life.
Right.
And, there's the part where Bud White, his integrity is that he would never rat out his partner.
Bloody Christmas. The press love to label. Officer White, you should know this is bigger than the police board. The grand jury's convening. Indictments may be handed down. Will you testify?
No, sir, I won't.
District Attorney Lowe?
You and Officer Stenslin brought the liquor to the station. Stenslin was already drunk. So do you see how appearing as a voluntary witness against him could offset the damage that you've done to yourself?
Sir, I won't testify against my partner or anyone else.
This man...
And that little bit alone doesn't seem to be a line that you would hear in the same way if that movie was made today, because you would have a lot of people now who are saying, you know what, we know the history of racism in the police departments, especially like the LAPD, and I can't sympathize with that character because Bud White, if he knew this was going on, he should have ratted him out. Like
that is more timely. That idea of top to bottom cover up is more timely today. But the idea of the LAPD being in hot water for racial reasons is actually, I mean, I think they had a big incident in early 20th century, the Zoot Suit riots and those sorts of things. There were a lot of racially charged, although that may have been the military, but there were a lot of racially charged things and corruption in the LAPD. So it actually could have been part of the reason why this story felt timely to people in 97 was this idea that like the stuff with the LAPD is coming back. Like it's always been this sort of thing. But you're right that the way we view the root of that problem nowadays makes Bud White a very difficult character because he's part of the problem.
It sat weird this time, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think another thing that's sort of tied into that, not so much modern day real life, but what we as audiences have seen and become used to is the anti-hero, the conflicted cop, that sort of thing. That is not new to us anymore. Like we've seen it done too overtly. We've seen it done really subtly. We're probably pretty fatigued at this point, actually, of the anti-hero. But you can imagine, when your choice is Titanic with like a very clear villain and very clear heroes and 100% pure on the hero side and 100% evil on the other side, that to see LA Confidential is just this complete breath of fresh air. Right. It's not like it was a complete anomaly. You had Fargo the year before, which, had some complex characters. And there's always been anti-heroes. It's not like, House invented the anti-hero. But I think that was another thing that made it so vibrant at the time and is something that makes it feel a little bit tired now.
Yeah, you're probably right. And again, I want to repeat that I can't fault the movie for that.
No.
And I'm not faulting
We're just talking about the experience of watching it.
And something that I noticed this time around that just didn't seem so honest about the movie was I felt like in the last quarter of the movie, as you're starting to get the reveal, things happen a lot quicker. And I feel like sometimes it's moving quickly because it doesn't want you to think too hard about it. And one of the instances would be, I'm just not buying that Bud White and Ed Exley would that quickly become buddies and start working on this together. Yeah. Now, they have their moment, they fight it out, but I could see them working together to figure this out, but it's got that weird ending where they're almost like buddy cops,
from here on
out.
LA Confidential 2.
Right. Bud and Ed.
Yeah, like
that last scene was just weird to me. I didn't buy it, I didn't buy that they would still be even friendly to each other afterwards.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's a small complaint, I know,
right.
But
I can see that.
I just thought character development. This is a movie all about character,
right?
And that didn't seem true to the characters to me.
I can understand that. I haven't read the book, but I can imagine that being something that was in translation.
The cutting room floor, yeah.
Right, the book has a much longer, whatever. And here's another thing that's less believable about it. The movie tried to make Lynn their connection at the end. It's like, that was the source of their fight.
Yeah, and she never really liked Ed.
Right.
Right? I mean, am I wrong about that? Like, I can't. She always thought he was kind of a despicable character.
For him, yeah. And she only did it, Satine-esque. She only did it.
Bringing back our last episode.
Right, from Moulin Rouge to get what she needed,
Yeah.
I see Bud because he doesn't know how to disguise who he is. I see Bud for all the ways he's different from you.
Don't underestimate me, Miss Bracken.
The way you've underestimated Bud White.
Yeah, and I never really saw that moment where she had any tenderness towards Ed.
Yeah.
I don't remember that happening.
I don't think it does.
Except that maybe she feels like he helped save Bud's life, like kept Bud safe. But yeah, I guess I never really thought about it. I mean, I think the movie isn't airtight. I think it's very difficult for a movie so complex to be airtight.
Well,
you
yeah.
know? But like I said, it's so effective in moving you along that it holds up to quite a bit of scrutiny, a lot more than a lot of other movies. I mean, referencing other episodes, Mission Impossible, that movie holds up to no scrutiny.
Yeah.
But this movie, you really kind of have to dig deep. And even then, it's just things that maybe wouldn't happen in real life, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, so Bud and Ed become pals too quickly.
Well, okay, but here's the thing. I started to wonder, I'm like, do they being Elroy, who wrote the book, I don't know how the book ends, or Hansen as the director, do they love these characters too much to let them go? Because I almost feel like the ending might have been better if Bud White had died.
Yeah.
And then you would have even had that weird encounter, and you would always have that sort of in the air. Like, would they have reconciled? It was a weird moment in that movie where it felt like something that was tied up too neatly in a way that felt contrary to the rest of the movie.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, you have to. I do wonder how the book ends, or if it was something the studio wanted, or you know. But again, I wonder how much of that is our 19 years later, having seen Breaking Bad, having seen The Wire, having seen all these things,
certainly,
and saying yeah, you can, you actually can have a satisfying story that ends ambiguously, that ends darkly.
Yeah, it certainly didn't bug me back when I watched it the first few times.
It's never bugged me. I really hadn't thought about it until you brought it up, and I don't know how fair that is. You know, like.
For me, you mean
for any of us to you know?
Well, that's
I remember somebody. There was we need to remember who it is because I say this a lot. That hindsight is not insight.
Mm-hmm.
That being able to say, you know what, I would have done this differently, and that's informed by 19 years of really great stuff that stood on the shoulders of LA Confidential. You know, like you can't really fault it for things that people have built on. Using it as a base.
I think you're absolutely right. And so I don't think I would fault it. I think it's just that's how I watch it now. It's almost impossible for me not to notice those things now. Of course.
So I think one of the things that I noticed this time watching this movie is what I found the movie to be saying, or what the movie is, you know, capital A about.
Okay.
For me, and like I alluded to at the beginning, this sort of meaning is appropriate because this movie isn't all that I remembered it being.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like this movie is about disillusionment or crumbling belief systems almost. That they all talk about the reasons they became cops in that one scene. You remember Exley and Vincennes are talking about why they became cops.
What's your point?
Rollo Tomasi's the reason I became a cop. I wanted to catch the guys who thought they could get away with it. It was supposed to be about justice. Then somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that. Why'd you become a cop?
I don't remember.
So you've got these ideals that people had, and possibly the public has for the police, all kind of crumbling and going away because their ideals met up with reality and reality won, you know?
Which, going back to maybe why the 50s is appealing.
Well, I was going to get to that.
Okay, you do it then. I'll let you do it. I think I see where you're going there. Yeah.
But you've also even have young talent. People, how many of those characters, they're side characters, but on this viewing, I really noticed how much time they really do give to the dreams of these young actors, all of whom became facsimiles of stars. They were made to look like movie stars. They were cheap imitations and used cheaply as prostitutes. So you've got this idealism of beauty and art being cut into beauty that people already have said they like and being used for paid sex.
Mm-hmm.
There's no art in what they're doing. And not only that, but they're taken advantage of by the industry and by the police. The people who are supposed to protect them are people who have taken part in their prostitution and have
Their
not
system,
protected
yeah.
them. And so, like you got to, the 50s is a very idealized time. Hollywood, especially that era of Hollywood, is so glamorized. The stars were so glamorous and everything was perfect. They call it the golden age. And we've got this idea of post-war America was just perfect. And they don't harp on that at all, but they set it there and just show the underbelly, this crumbling of all that was wrong even in that time period that we look back on. And that's the American values. That's the house we want. That's the family we want. Well, no, that was a racist time. Yeah, the civil rights brought it. Like, it seems like the 60s were worse, but that's only because people were finally fighting it.
That's only when they were starting they were trying to tear off the mask. Really.
Yeah, it's not like people started being racist in the 60s and then everybody was like, wait a minute, this is getting too out of hand. It was like everybody was racist for a really long time. The 50s were racist. There were prostitutes in the 50s.
Well, it goes back to what you're saying about these characters. They're starting to question things.
Yeah.
They're starting to question their motives and why they do things.
Yeah.
You know.
And America was questioning things in the early 90s with police and racism. And Bill Clinton at that time was involved in the sex scandal. So, well, who's our leader? And like, the president is supposed to be presidential, not getting blowjobs in the Oval Office. Like, what's happening here? And so the movie for me this time around was all about how ideals crumble. And what do you do when that happens? Do you crumble with it, or do you stand up against it?
Yeah, and where do you think the movie stands on that?
I think that's a good question. And in a way, I feel like LA Confidential was maybe a counterintuitive at best, a bad choice at worst, for the discussion of why pick different decades for nostalgia. Because I think the 50s had its heyday in the 80s. You've got like Back to the Future,
Stand By Me.
That
I think is when the 80s make a movie set in the 50s, they're not really challenging that much about the 50s.
Right.
And then when you get to
so
the
in
90s with like well, you've got obviously LA Confidential, but you've also got Pleasantville.
But yeah, the 90s was sort of that deconstruction of that glossy view of the 50s. And in the 90s, I feel like the glossy view was on the 60s. I think 30 years ago is like, oh man, those were the days. And I think it's the childhood of the 30-year-olds, the 30 to 40-year-olds. That childhood is the glossy time. And then
I see what you're saying, yeah. So what's an example of a 90s movie set in the 60s that was really rosy of the 60s?
The Sandlot.
Forrest Gump was mostly in the 60s. Yeah.
Sandlot.
Yeah.
Now and Then, right?
Yep. What was it? That movie, The War, with Kevin Costner and Elijah Wood. Yeah.
My Girl. I think there's a lot, and we don't need to keep going through every decade. Like, all right, so in the 2000s, it was in the 70s. What that have been. But from what I gather of The Nice Guys, I haven't seen it, and it's like I'm not really basing anything, but it's a very violent, very vulgar movie about like The Nice Guys. I think it's sort of an ironic title. These guys aren't super nice, but again, it's the 70s, which is 40 years ago, and it's not a rosy view of that decade.
Was there ever a rosy view of the 70s, though?
Well, that's why I wanted
Although
to...
you did have... Last decade, you had the 70s show, which was...
You had that 70s show. You had Almost Famous.
True. Yeah, you're right.
Boogie Nights came out the same year as LA Confidential.
Right.
That was set in the 70s. Definitely not rosy.
No.
Although it was a little bit rosy in the 70s. And the 80s,
the 80s was when it was
rap
bad.
In Boogie Nights. But we're another thing though, as far as like, because I was wondering if like 97 was sort of like a nostalgic year, and it wasn't like overwhelmingly nostalgic looking at the movies that came out, but that is the year that the Star Wars movies were re-released into theaters. So there was sort of like this general like looking back mindset. But I feel like there is something to this 30 years glossy, 40 years
the deconstruction of that.
Right.
Yeah.
And right now, have we talked about how the 80s have come back?
We did in our last episode.
Yeah,
we sort of
were,
talked
like,
about
leading
that.
into
So that's the
this.
glossy time right now.
Yeah, we're in the glossy time of looking at the 80s. I think you see that a lot in sitcoms. You've got like Goldberg's is set in the 80s. I don't know if you've seen that show.
I think I've seen an episode, yeah.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because we are in our 30s.
Yes, absolutely.
And my view of the 80s is pretty rosy
Now,
for
here's
the most
the thing.
part.
I've talked to you about this.
Because you get scared of like, I hate how everyone's always staring at their smartphones. And, when we were kids, it was just simpler,
Yeah.
you know?
We played outside.
Yeah.
I've talked to
We
you.
had 6 channels on the TV.
Right.
You know.
Somebody had to get up. Yeah. I have talked to you about this before, and I've never really talked about it on mic, but it's something that I think is not only happening and true, but something that I think is dangerous, truthfully. And here's the thing. We aren't making movies so much about the 80s, but we've got Transformers, we've got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, we've got Fuller House coming back, we've got
we got
what else?
Pee-wee had a new movie.
Pee-wee had a new movie on Netflix. There are cartoons being remade. We've got this rampant nostalgia for things from our childhood, 30-somethings, 40-somethings childhoods back in the 80s and creeping into the 90s now. You've got Jimmy Fallon bringing the Saved by the Bell cast back together. And like all these things that people are cashing in on. And the reason I think it's dangerous is, first off, let me tell you why I think it's happening. And I don't think it's supremely unique to our generation, but I think it kind of hit our generation a little bit harder. And that is that when we were kids, what was adulthood going to be like? Like it was going to be the greatest, right? Like we could eat pizza whenever we wanted, and we could finally like do all that stuff that like adults do. And I'm going to spend my money on this and all that stuff. And then we got to adulthood, or we're about to get to adulthood. And not only did 9/11 kind of interrupt our teenage years, but 2008 and the financial collapse ruined our young adult years because we didn't have money, we didn't get jobs, and we realized adulthood sucks. And I know that older generations would call this
being whiny.
Or a sign of our generation. But I think our adulthood was harder than our parents' adulthood.
Yeah. Our parents, maybe not the generation before that, but
our parents' adulthood. And so we had to live with our parents, which was seen by them as laziness
or failure
on their part and ours. But really it was my college degree, which cost me 16 times more than yours, got me no job. And the unpaid internship, that job market exploded. But the actual paying job market was nowhere.
And full-time employment was no guarantee that you were actually going to be able to even have a chance at the kind of stuff that your parents had a chance at when they received full-time employment really anywhere.
Right. Yeah. And that's not the job that we're going to do until we die. And it's not going to necessarily be the job that sustains us. We still have to live with our 6 friends. And adulthood sucked. Ignoring who's to blame for that. So what happened to our generation is we regressed and we went inside ourselves and we said, I need to go back to when I was happy and things were good and when adulthood didn't suck. So we dress like our parents. We wear the glasses our parents used to wear. We put filters on our pictures to make them look old like our pictures used to look. We bring back the TV shows and movies from our childhood, and we try to recreate our childhoods as adults. And you see like the outbreak of like adult Chuck E. Cheese's, like ball pits for adults. Like we want it. We haven't been able to move past that because adulthood hasn't embraced us and we have not been able to embrace it. And so the reason I think it's become dangerous is when I saw not even the whole pilot, but part of the pilot for Fuller House. And that show was so depressingly bad. And the reason I think it's dangerous and we need to like really just buckle down and move on
and say enough is enough.
Right. And just take adulthood back. We've stagnated. You've got some positive things, I'll say the Batman reboot. Like that was a positive contribution while also looking back and building off of things. But then when you've got Fuller House, which is literally recycling the script. So anyway, that's pretty far afield from LA Confidential. I'm sorry I led us there, but I think I think that's the current state of nostalgia, and it feels very desperate, and it feels very regressive. I think what we're missing is this evaluative, deconstructive look back that LA Confidential brings. And that is one reason why I think this is a great and important movie. Because it doesn't handhold you through that deconstruction. It doesn't point to specific things about the 50s. It takes this general idea that we all have about the 50s and Hollywood glamour. And it's a backdrop to this story that then can be extrapolated to the backdrop and the bigger time. There was a positive contribution, a positive outcome to looking back. Whereas now, our looking back is just this desperate, like gazing through a rain-soaked window. Right. Do you disagree? You look like you disagree.
What I'm wondering is, do you think just waiting it out will take care of it, in the sense that we are in that rosy period because we are in our 30s now, and if we just wait till we're in our 40s, we're going to see a lot of movies come out or TV shows come out that are going to just nail our decade that we grew up in, you know? Because you talked about The Nice Guys, but one of the highest rated shows last year was Fargo season 2. And that was, for whatever reason, they decided to set that in the 70s. It is a very dark, grim look at that period, with still, kind of like LA Confidential, actually, it has those touches where you're kind of like, the nostalgia's sort of still there. You know, you're kind of like, that's what the living rooms looked like. And that's what, you know, the hairstyles were. And it feels lived in, you know?
Yeah.
But it's very, very critical of the politics of the time. It's very honest and grim about the underworld of crime going on in there. You know, so is it a matter of us, we just need to wait it out? We need to wait out another 5, 6, 7 years.
Nobody is being smart or critical right now. You know, I'm just saying the prevailing, the thing that's different is that
it's lazy. I'll put you.
It's super lazy
because you take even Back to the Future, which is a rosy movie of the 50s. It's at least a new concept. Now we're just saying, oh, you loved that when you were a kid. Let's just do it again.
Right.
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, don't change anything about it. You friggin' make those characters women? How dare you? Like the fact that is such a thing isn't
just
about
Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters, yeah, sorry. Ghostbusters with the all-female cast, people are so
like you can't,
angry.
You can't even reboot something in a slightly skewed way.
Right. And not only is that sad because of the blind sexism there, but it's also sad because of how personally people are taking it. Yeah. You're ruining my childhood is what people say about it.
Yeah.
Not some people are being complete lunatics and saying, you know, they're just appealing to feminists and this is the, you know, America going down the toilet. But what you hear mostly is you're ruining my childhood, which it's so sad that is how important that movie is. But that's what people are remembering about their life.
We're disillusioned.
Yes.
You know, we are disillusioned to the point where we're just grasping at whatever we can and saying, I need to have something I can hold on to for comfort.
I was happy then. If I have that back, I will be happy again. And I'm not saying that nobody is deconstructing and being smart and analyzing, but people are not paying to see it. LA Confidential was a big hit.
Yeah.
What I think is the saving grace is actually movies that are looking closer. The Big Short, Spotlight, movies that are saying like, you're not unhappy because Ghostbusters has a female cast. You're unhappy because like The Big Short's saying like, let's really look at why we're unhappy and life sucks right now. It's because the banks did this knowingly. The government let it happen. The government is continuing to let it happen and will let it happen again. Spotlight, same thing with religion. Like, here are the reasons you're unhappy. It has nothing to do with the fact that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles went off the air. Like, that is what I see as being the vital look back material.
You know, and it's interesting you say that because both of those movies, actually, I do consider them somewhat also historical dramas because they are so clued into what that period looked like.
Right.
You know, you watch Spotlight
Yes.
or Big Short and you're like, yes, that's the early 2000s. That's exactly what that looked like, you know, and there's still that attention to detail.
Right.
But their purpose is entirely different. There's no nostalgia in those things, you know?
Not at all. All right. So we've gone pretty far away from 1950s LA. But I followed it.
Yeah.
I think like LA Confidential, casual listeners, people who are just, you know, going about their business will be able to follow this conversation. And people who feel like listening to this episode 50 times will probably find some holes in our logic,
right.
but it'll hold together even under scrutiny. Right?
Yes, I will agree that this podcast episode was of the caliber of LA Confidential.
Yeah. I think it'll go down in history as the LA Confidential podcast episodes.
Yes.
So does your rating change at all? I can't imagine it would.
Well, I mean, it's 3.5. I'm 3.5, 4 stars. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'll probably keep it at a 4-star just because I feel like as I talked it through, I was just being a little nitpicky.
Yeah, you were.
But
you were. But that's fine.
You know, but I think what I was trying to highlight ultimately was that even a movie made in the 90s set in the 50s, though it's set in a past time period, still shows the characteristics of the year it was made, the 90s, you know?
Oh, certainly.
You know what I mean? And so I think at this viewing, especially knowing we were going to be talking about it through this lens, it just sort of really showed to me like, yes, this is actually a 90s movie.
Yes.
LA Confidential is a 90s movie.
Very much.
And I can take those little nitpicky things and be like, kind of compartmentalize them into that 90s thing. Like, it's still a great movie.
Yeah. I'm not going to bump it up to 5. I think actually, if this makes any sense or matters at all, I think my opinion of it dropped it to a 4. But recollecting on how important it was to me, bumped it up a 0.5 star. So it stays at 4.5, but there was movement within that.
Dear Lord. These stars, man.
Yeah.
they mean a lot.
We need a chart to understand what we're talking about.
I feel like
I think we're on the same page pretty much.
For the most part, I think we've got an understanding of each other.
Sure.
So why don't we go ahead and talk about what we're going to be discussing in our next episode of Can We Still Be Friends?
Well, we've talked enough about the upcoming remake. We might as well just watch the original.
Just do it.
Next episode 41. We didn't get any Over the Hill birthday cards for
I was
our
hoping
40th
for like
episode.
a new mug, you know, an Over the 40, Over the Hill mug. But
yeah, that's kind of on me. I should have gotten you that. But I don't think I actually said the name. We're going to watch Ghostbusters, the original Ghostbusters, next time. Part of the reason why I don't understand why this new movie would ruin your childhood is that this movie wasn't really a part of my childhood.
No.
I saw it later in life, and I think it'll be interesting to see how it holds up. Like, is it a movie of its time? And a reboot is actually going to be a breath of fresh air? Or is it a movie that didn't really need to be touched?
Yeah, it wasn't really part of my childhood either, except for the cartoon. The cartoon was actually more a part of my life than the movie. And I mean, it's one of those movies that I'm a little nervous about watching because when I did watch it, I was just really lukewarm on it. And I know that there's so many people who listening who love Ghostbusters. So we'd love to hear from those people. Like, what was it I was missing? Yeah. What should I be thinking about as I watch this again?
And as much as we want to hear that, we also want you to rewatch it with a critical eye. Don't just hate us if we don't love it. Don't just yell at us for...
We want an informed hate.
Yeah. I would say most of you would need to rewatch it. Just based on what I know of people's viewing habits of Ghostbusters, and I've done a lot of looking into it.
You've done the research.
Yeah.
I think there was recently a Pew Research study that said most fans of Ghostbusters hadn't seen it in at least 5 years.
Right. Yeah.
Like 80%.
Oh yeah, like 83% hadn't seen it in 5 years, and then another 15% hadn't seen it in 10 years. So it's really actually a very small percentage of people who've seen it recently.
Right.
So
we're trying to remedy that.
This is research based information. Rewatch it because I can't guarantee you haven't seen it recently, but the odds are, based on all the research out there, and there is a lot,
right,
you haven't seen it recently.
So as you rewatch it,
Right.
as you ponder everything we said about nostalgia in this episode, as you
Yeah.
think about LA Confidential yourself, we would love to hear any thoughts or comments that you might have or questions. We answer questions too if you've got any.
We do.
So get in contact with us. You can always shoot us an email. That's feedback@canwestillbefriends.net. While I'm talking about that URL, that's the URL of our website,
Yeah.
www.canwestillbefriends.net. And you can always comment on the episode on our actual website. And then we've also got the, Facebook, Twitter. We're there.
Classic.
Haven't gotten into Snapchat yet.
No, I don't know why we would.
Well, let us know if you think we should be on Snapchat.
Yeah.
And you can even give us a phone call if you'd like. Leave us a voicemail. That number is 847-306-9532. And I just want to say, our last episode was Moulin Rouge, and the response on that was great. I
Yeah.
loved reading what people had to say about
Yeah.
their experience watching Moulin Rouge and what we had to say about it and their thoughts where they disagreed and agreed. So keep that up.
Yeah, we loved hearing it. And there are so many ways to listen to our podcast. You've got iTunes, and if you listen to us on iTunes, it would be great if you left us a rating. We've got Google Music, which is a new
place we're at.
Place for us. Yeah, thank you. Couldn't think of the word place.
Yeah.
We've got Stitcher, we've got Player FM, we've got a bunch of different ways for you to find us. We don't really care. Just so grateful that you're listening. And we won't stop talking.
No.
So you will have to keep listening.
I think I'm just going to actually do a fade out this time. Let's just keep talking,
really?
and I'll just fade it out.
So we just need
and
noise and talking so that it sounds like our listeners. And thank you.
Yes.
Goodbye. So
Yeah,
thank you for that.
Thank you for
listening,
that. And
goodbye
we'll
and
see you
ratings
next
and
time. Social
feedback.
networks.